head of Bavarian security, Hans Longemann, delivers a report to his superiors, revealing the inner workings of a secret society called Le Cirque. Included with the report is an agenda from a leaked Le Cirque meeting. Item 1 reads, "To effect a change of government in the United Kingdom, accomplished." What if history's watershed moments were carefully crafted manipulations?
The real-world decision-making takes place in the smoke-filled back rooms, in secret.
Le Cirque is the most powerful organization you've ever heard of.
A worldwide network of intelligence agents, politicians, and power brokers with one goal: winning the Cold War.
Knowledge is power. You add to it the layers of secrecy, and you have a particularly volatile weapon.
Since the early 1950s, this group has played puppet master to history. Smear campaigns, arms deals, propaganda, and plots involving sinister characters.
This is communism versus capitalism at any cost. You have to be prepared to dance with the devil.
What can we discover about those who sit in the circle of power?
Secret societies are basically conspiracies. A bunch of people getting together to do something that the rest of the world either does not want them to do or prefers not to hear about it.
You can imagine there is a quote-unquote deep state entirely independent of government, and also to be led by or populated by individuals who don't really have a moral or ethical compass.
Le Circle is a neoconservative think tank of political power brokers. We're talking former heads of state, policy wonks, diplomats, ministers of parliament, and intelligence agents from around the world. MI5, MI6, the CIA, the French SDECE, the German BND. They've all got representation in Le Circle.
And their decisions influence millions of people across Western Europe and, in fact, throughout the world.
Since 1953, Le Cirque has come together to discuss world events and share intelligence. In quiet hotels, hidden away from the public eye, they plot the fate of the free world. But Le Cirque wasn't always this deep state actor. The group was founded in the aftermath of World War II as a secret diplomatic channel between two nations looking to collaborate in the face of new and intimidating world powers. World War II began in September of 1939, when Britain and France declared war on Germany in response to Hitler's invasion of Poland.
By 1940, France were knocked out of the war and the country was divided in two. You have Vichy France on the one hand, which is, for want of a better expression, the handmaiden to Nazi Germany. Pretty much has to do what it's told. And then you have the occupied part of France. But of course, there is the exception in that narrative, and that is Charles de Gaulle. The general is appalled at the French capitulation, camps in London, there's his new headquarters. His is a military France, a France that has never stopped fighting, a free France.
After almost 6 years of death and destruction.
So what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about our honeymoon. What about Africa? Safari. Swim with elephants. Hot air balloon. Lions growling in the giraffes that come in through your window.
Wait, can we afford a safari? Great question. Like everything, takes a little planning.
Or put the money towards a down payment.
With enough room for a baby?
Babies.
Baby.
Let's take a look at those scenarios.
JP Morgan Wealth Management has advisors in Chase branches and tools like Wealth Plan to help keep you on track. When you're planning for it all, the answer is JP Morgan Wealth Management.
Popeyes is getting saucy. New chicken dipper starring Popeye's signature sauce. Love that chicken from Popeyes.
Germany was finally defeated in 1945, leaving a bombed-out Europe.
Wherever you look at Europe, there's real devastation. If you look at images of places like Berlin in 1945, it's apocalyptic.
In 1944, 1,188,600 tons of bombs were dropped on Europe, predominantly Germany. 1/4 of German houses had been destroyed. In cities, ratchet that figure up to 50%.
That's the legacy from which Germany immediately has to contend with the accounting that's coming for what the Nazis did, but also the future. What's going to happen to us tomorrow and the next day and the next day?
On the evening of May 8th, 1945, Germany signed the Instrument of Surrender, a legal document disbanding the Nazi Party and ending World War II in Europe. But by this time, Germany's post-war fate was already being decided by Allied leaders. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had met 3 months earlier at the Yalta Conference. Under the terms of the surrender, Germany would be split into 4 zones.
You have half of the country occupied by a consortium of 3 major Allied forces, the British, the Americans, and the French. And then, of course, you have the Russians. They both have very different estimations of what Germany's going to look like. And then to make it even more dramatic, you had a divided Berlin, which becomes that kind of model of the Cold War in a lot of ways.
And then, of course, in the wake of a war which has cost everyone so dearly, you have what are known as reparations, to the tune of $23 billion.
Despite being on the winning side, France is also facing a difficult post-war reality.
France has sizable economic problems. A lot of its industries had been fundamentally undermined or derailed by the Second World War.
France was Nazi occupied, and that means it's fair game for the extensive Allied bombing. It's all been blown up. Now you can imagine at the end of a war, coming back to that, and you don't even have the ability to truly say you're the winners.
National identity is something that is instilled in everybody. And when you've got a strong identity and you've got something to be proud about, the country's morale is stronger. And that gives rise to all sorts of social and economic benefits. But you've got France in the opposite situation, not only shattered as a country, but also embarrassed by the German takeover, by the Vichy government.
The Vichy regime divided French people, divided families. That's something that you don't shake very quickly. I would argue that France is haunted by that legacy all the way up to today.
While Germany and France are struggling with their recoveries, a powerful new alliance takes center stage. The United States and United Kingdom had already taken steps to formalize their relationship when they signed the Atlantic Charter in 1941. That agreement would be the foundation for the United Nations Charter in 1945.
There's a kind of a mixed reaction to the Anglo-American alliance. A lot of Europeans really welcomed it because it provided an obvious stability after years of instability, particularly when the Americans came in with massive amounts of economic aid to rebuild their shattered economies. On the other hand, a lot of people were wary about that. They obviously understood there was a price to pay for American economic support that required them giving away a certain amount of economic and political sovereignty.
They may not like the indignity of having to accept borrowed American dollars, but they were going to have to put up with it until they came up with a better solution. Where are the answers for some of the common people of France? They're not looking to Charles de Gaulle. The biggest political party in that early post-war period in France is the Communist Party. And that, when you have a significant superpower camping in Eastern Europe in the name of communism, is really something to worry about.
Worry over the rise of communism in France leads one Frenchman to convene a secret meeting in the early 1950s.
And Antoine Pinay had been a fairly establishment French rightist politician who'd briefly been part of the Vichy regime, but then also got all sorts of awards for helping save Jews and secretly supporting the resistance. In other words, a man who played all sides.
Pinay was defined for his Catholicism, for his conservatism, for his passionate stance against communism. He was also keen for a rapprochement with Germany.
The second politician in the room is Konrad Adenauer, founder of the Christian Democratic Union and Chancellor of Germany from 1949 until 1963.
Like Pinay, he was a Catholic, he was a conservative, he had lost all his posts early on with the rise of Nazism in the 1930s, and by the end of the war he finds himself placed in a prisoner of war camp. He's got a clean slate, and that's what Germany needs.
Though his political opponents favor working toward a unified Germany, Adenauer believed the only way forward is to create alliances with Western Europe and allow East Germany and the Soviet Union to crumble on their own. It is in this spirit of collaboration that Konrad Adenauer meets with Antoine Pinay for the first time. Though a fraught history feeds the distrust between France and Germany, their shared concerns about the English-American alliance and the communist threat bring them together. This is the beginning of Le Cirque.
I view the first meeting of Le Cirque as really a political and diplomatic back-channeling, which in the CIA is something that we use quite often when we don't want things on record or we don't want to tip our hand.
Does Pinay want to be seen rubbing shoulders too closely and too publicly immediately with Germany? Is that a good look? Is it one better done in private? The Germans, meanwhile, know that they're not even a sovereign nation. They can't really afford to put a foot wrong.
Adenauer and Pinay have brought along two men for the meeting.
You have Franz Josef Strauss, who is in German circles a pretty well-known politician. The fourth member is Jean Villet, who is a lawyer by trade, but obviously working in French intelligence, and his inclusion makes this initial meeting of Le Cirque very intriguing, right? Why is he there?
Jean Violet was a shadowy figure. He might have sympathized with the Nazis during the war. What we do know is that before the war, in the 1930s, he belonged to a group called La Cagoule.
La Cagoule, the Hooded Ones, formerly known as the Secret Committee of Revolutionary Action, which may sound like a left-wing group, but in fact was a violent right-wing group. They liked to wear masks because they were involved in bombings, coup plots, assassinations as well. Villet, in 1944, shows up as an agent of SEDES, the SDECE, which was the French intelligence service. How did he go from being a fascist terrorist in the 1930s and then simply walk in as part of the new republic's intelligence service? We don't know.
Was he a good guy? He's not someone I'd have had around for tea, no. But we're at war with the communists. You have to be prepared to dance with the devil.
In 1953, these four men steal away 3 times a year to hold secret congresses in tucked-away hotels across Europe. But these are not typical secret society meetings.
When you hear secret society, you think cloak and dagger, initiation rituals, blood oaths, chanting in the moonlight. This is nothing like that.
They didn't meet with secret handshakes or anything else. These were serious guys. They were like businessmen who met in a boardroom and discussed their agenda and then separate again for another year.
What they're talking about is also talked about by many other agencies, institutions, and meetings. Where it gets a little bit more, conspiratorial is precisely what they were saying and why.
It's nothing mind-blowing except for the fact that they don't want their respective governments to know anything about it. But why is that?
Although formal minutes for these early meetings have never seen the light of day, Antoine Pinay and Konrad Adenauer are treated to a major policy win in 1957, when France and Germany signed the Treaty of Rome.
6 signatures, including West Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. They are going to establish what will become the European Economic Community, which promises economic cooperation, establishing a common market with the free flow of goods, services, capital, and people. This is the beginning of the European Union.
Le Cirque extends invitations to important figures from France and Germany's new economic allies, and in the coming years will continue to expand. inviting influential conservatives from across Western Europe.
Some of Le Cercle's new members are shadowy characters, and this will be a reoccurring theme in Le Cercle.
Many new members would go on to be accused of participating in conspiracies, financing terrorist organizations, and other crimes. Like fascist Spain's Minister for Information, Alfredo Sanchez Bella, who in 1970 was accused of trying to bribe an official to change the sentences in the murder trial of 6 members of a Basque separatist group.
And he joins this circle in the early 1960s, and that represents the inclusion of places like Spain and Portugal, which are noteworthy because at the time they were really hardcore fascists. If you include states like that in any kind of association amongst democratic countries, you're obviously no longer just about democracy.
Italian politician Giulio Andreotti is also invited to the inner sanctum of Le Cercle.
Andreotti becomes the Italian prime minister later on in life and is notorious for his mafia connections.
Over his career, he would be accused of gathering intelligence, using the Italian Secret Service on almost every public figure, and would be involved in an attempted coup, along with the commander of Italian police, the CIA's Roman station chief, and Italy's Gladio network.
Gladio, which means sword, was first instituted in Italy, but it was spread all over the place. Secret armies that can wage an anti-communist partisan war in Europe. The CIA, MI6, West German BND were all heavily invested. Billions of dollars off the record, money being siphoned from other programs, which all find their way into buying lots of ammunition, which is buried somewhere in a forest in Belgium.
You also have them working with these organizations like Agenter Press, who the CIA also worked with to train mercenaries to fight communism in Africa, in the Middle East, and even Europe itself.
When you include all of those guys, of course it looks like a really interesting cabal of sort of the dark underworld.
Remember, the original 4 were not exactly saints. Viollet has a connection to La Cagoule. We have Franz Joseph Strauss, and he's forced to step down as Minister of Defense for jailing journalists, claiming they had published sensitive material. And Konrad Adenauer will later be found to have been spying on his opponents using his own intelligence agency, the BND.
Meetings now happen just twice a year, and each meeting was capped at 20 to 30 attendees.
It's mind-blowing to think of these guys getting together in one room. You've got senior politicians, you've got aristocrats, you've got intelligence experts, you've got people from darker corners of the world, and they are going to discuss what the world should do to make themselves better. But they probably discussed other things as well, and we don't know what they are.
Things are going well for Le Cercle, but in the early 60s, the winds of diplomacy shift, and the group will struggle to keep up. In 1963, Le Cercle prevented the United Kingdom from joining the European Economic Community when Konrad Adenauer secretly supported a veto from French President Charles de Gaulle.
We hadn't been there from the outset deliberately. We'd chosen our empire over France's European brainchild. De Gaulle says no, not once in 1963, but twice in 1967 as well.
Le Cercle's fingerprints are all over this. Penet and Adenauer saw Le Cercle as the obvious counterweight to the UK and US influence on Europe, and they didn't want the UK in the EEC. Now, Penet had Charles de Gaulle's ear. As a matter of fact, he helped to get de Gaulle elected. But Adenauer had to fight his own cabinet, who favored the idea of Britain coming on board.
The UK's membership in the